Welcome to The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Thursday, July the 9th, 2020. On this episode, the U.S. Supreme Court, Donald Trump, and you the voter. Next. Welcome back. So here we are. We have coronavirus. We have all kinds of things going on in this world. And here in the United States, we have some significant Supreme Court decisions that came down today. One of the ones that came down, there are three, I think, of principal importance. And there may have been more than three, but the three that I have seen on this day are all significant decisions, but one of them is not being talked about. If you are watching your friendly neighborhood corporate news media, you will realize that there has been little, if any, in fact, virtually no discussion at all of, I think, the most important decision of all of the three that I have seen on this day, and that is the case of the Native Americans who have actually had a huge win today in a significant decision in the Supreme Court. A very significant decision, actually. And this was a case that did not get any attention at all. Literally no attention at all. And I think that it's a crime that none of the corporate news media, although I'm not surprised, focused at all or said anything about this decision. And they had on certain networks 3, 4 panelists, 5, 6, 7 panelists, all talking about Donald Trump and the two decisions that I will get to, but nothing at all, nothing about McGirt versus Oklahoma, which is a significant decision. Significant Supreme Court decision. And the bottom line is that in that decision today, the Supreme Court of this country held that the Creek Nation and members of the Creek Nation cannot be tried in state court for crimes that happened within, as they say, reservation, I put that word in quotes, boundaries, because that is land that remains, quote unquote, Indian country for the purposes of federal law. So the state of Oklahoma cannot prosecute any crime, any major crime within those boundaries of the Creek Indian Reservation. That's what the Supreme Court did today. So in essence, the United States Supreme Court is officially recognizing Native American land. Quite frankly, this whole country, of course, is Native American land. But in this decision, the Supreme Court is officially acknowledging that truth for the purposes of a very important decision, handing the Creek Nation a massive and important victory, to say the least, over the state of Oklahoma. I think that's a huge victory. Now, of course, you can say that it's maybe not that big a victory at all because, hey, this is Native American land. So is it really that much of a victory in that sense, from that perspective? But I do think from an operational perspective of one of the three branches of government, the judicial branch, actually affirmatively speaking up and saying that the state of Oklahoma has no jurisdiction, basically, to prosecute any crime or to try any crime in their court that happened within the so-called reservation boundaries. I think that's a good decision. I think that's a very good decision. I think that's a very good decision. And by the way, Neil Gorsuch, the conservative justice on the Supreme Court, the one that Moscow Mitch McConnell sat out and held on for. Neil Gorsuch, the guy that should not be on the Supreme Court because, of course, Merrick Garland was the Obama choice who did not get a hearing at all from Mitch McConnell. And Mitch McConnell obstructed him for almost a whole year. Yeah, that Justice Neil Gorsuch. He sided with the majority. He formed that fifth vote, certainly a decisive fifth vote, in that 5-4 decision, McGirt versus Oklahoma. It's a huge decision. And of course, the corporate news media is not talking about it. Surprise, surprise. But they are talking about these other two decisions, and they are talking on and on about them. Donald Trump, in 2 Supreme Court cases today, was the loser in both. And I don't care how many pundits tell you that, this is a win for Donald Trump. No, it's not. If you call a win not having his taxes displayed for 4 months, or for at least 6 months or another year, then that's a really fragile, narrow idea of a win. Because the fact of the matter is that in one of these decisions, Trump versus Vance, Vance being Cyrus Vance being the Manhattan District Attorney in New York. The fact of the matter is that the Supreme Court today ruled that Cyrus Vance is allowed to seek the tax records of Donald Trump. So Donald Trump's taxes that they were trying to get at least 8 years of, if not more, that Cyrus Vance, who is, compiling a case, to say the least, investigating Trump University and all these other things that Trump has done, all these other corrupt enterprises in New York. This is a huge win. He can access those records. He can subpoena those documents. He can get those documents now. He can move to get those documents. This is what the victory was today. And to those pundits out there who were thinking that this was a loss for Cyrus Vance, or this was a win, rather, for Donald Trump, same difference. All you have to do is go on Donald Trump's Twitter feed and see what he thought about it. Clearly, this was not a win for him, and clearly his tweets, loath though I am to even mention them on this podcast, make it clear that he didn't think he won anything, that he thought that he actually was the big loser, and he actually was. This Trump versus Vance decision simply required that the heightened standard that the Trump attorneys were arguing was necessitated to seek his taxes was in fact not necessary in this case. The Supreme Court distinguished in a 7-2. Heck, this is no win for Donald Trump when 7 out of 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices say that the Manhattan District Attorney can proceed with getting records of Donald Trump's taxes. That is no defeat for Cyrus Vance. And that is no win for Donald Trump. I mean, come on. It's as simple as that. This is not a win for Donald Trump. He had 7 Supreme Court justices saying that Cyrus Vance, the Manhattan prosecutor, could go after and seek these Trump taxes for their prosecution. They're there for the prosecution of Trump. I mean, this is huge in that way. So I understand why the media is talking about it in that way. But to suggest, as some of these pundits have, that Donald Trump won today, it's just nonsense. If winning is, well, they don't get to see the taxes, they don't get to go after them until after the election, that's not really a win. That's kind of a win in name only, which I guess is that's all that suffices. But this was huge. 7 Supreme Court justices, including some of the most conservative ones. The only 2, of course, the arch conservatives, were the 2 that dissented predictably, Alito and Thomas. Well, that's no surprise. Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas dissented. But you had Neil Gorsuch, you had Chief Justice John Roberts, you had those, and Justice Kavanaugh, for goodness sake, of all people, another staunch conservative. They all joined. They were all part of the majority. They joined the more liberal wing of the court and said emphatically 7-2. I mean, that ain't a victory for Donald Trump, folks. That's not a victory for Donald Trump at all. The court said, again, heightened standards for Trump's tax records do not apply here. Because what was happening in this case is that they, being Trump's lawyers, were claiming, executive privilege. And what the court did here was distinguish this case from the case U.S. versus Nixon. Or was it Nixon versus U.S.? I think it was Nixon versus U.S. And in Nixon versus the United States, back in the 1970s, Nixon was claiming executive privilege over the recordings in the White House that he made because it would endanger national security. And here, Justice Roberts, who wrote the opinion, I think he wrote both opinions, both majority opinions. And I'll get to why he wrote both, because I haven't talked about the second Trump case yet. But Justice Roberts said, no, this standard that Nixon was asserting in Nixon versus U.S. does not apply here. And by the way, Nixon lost that case. But this heightened standard that the court used of, well, this is the test that we have to meet, let's face it, it doesn't apply here because these records that Trump is saying are records that endanger his standing as an executive don't apply. I mean, these are private records. This is before he even walked into the White House. So you can't assert a standard of, executive domain and the unitary executive and, national security is harmed here. When you're talking about private tax records, those aren't privileged. Private tax records aren't privileged. And they do not form any basis for a national security assertion or anything like that. And that's the essence of what this Trump versus Vance decision was today. That's the essence of it. The other Trump case was also a defeat for Donald Trump. And this case was called Trump versus Mazars. That is Emerson Mike A-Z, as in zebra, A-R-S. Trump versus Mazars. Now, what happened in that case was that you had three different House committees led by the Democrats in April of 2019, just last year, that as part of their investigations into Donald Trump and emoluments and all those kinds of things, and the impeachment investigations and all of that, all three of those committees, I think one of them was the Committee on Financial Services. That committee, by the way, is headed by the Democratic Representative Maxine Waters, Auntie Maxine, to you. And the House Ways and Means Committee, I believe, also was looking at these things. I'm not quite sure if that's the exact committee. It may have been another one. They were looking at this. They were looking for these financial records as well. They were trying to subpoena them. And also the House Oversight Committee, headed by the now late, great Congressman Elijah Cummings. Sadly, Elijah Cummings passed away 6 months after this April 2019 pursuit of these Trump financial records. He passed away in October of 2019. So all three of these congressional committees were pursuing these financial records of Donald Trump. All of these before he walked into the White House. All these financial records that they were looking at are records that are attributed to him, are his financial records for years. I think it was about 8 years, 10 years, whatever it was, before he walked into the White House. And the Trump administration refused to comply. They didn't turn over the documents. And then thus we had this case that the Supreme Court decided on today. And what the Supreme Court decided in Mazars was pretty much the same thing, except that the case had to be what they call remanded, which means brought back down to the previous lower court, directly below the Supreme Court. The case that received this, the court that received this case prior, the last court before the Supreme Court to hear this case, needed to hear it again on a key issue. Because what the decision of Trump versus Mazars was very clear. Congress can seek these records, but not right now. Not before the presidential election, and the lower court must decide the separation of powers issue. Because it's an issue that's tricky. It's an issue that could involve the political implications of the Democratic House seeking these records during a presidential election year. I mean, they didn't seek them this year. They sought them last year. But what the U.S. Supreme Court was doing today was avoiding getting involved in the political aspects of what the House was doing. And then it basically used language to signal that and put that onus onto the lower court to decide. What they said is that, well, the House of Representatives, they may well have a political motive here to obtain these records during the time that Donald Trump is in office and definitely during an election season. This is not something we can really feel comfortable doing because there's a separation of powers issue here, and there may be a political motivation here. And we as the judiciary really don't want to make a decision on the efficacy of the House of Representatives from the legislative branch, of course, of government, making a determination of access to documents from the executive branch. Hence the Supreme Court's concern about separation of powers. So what the Mazars decision established, and again, it was 7-2, same 7 judges and the same 2 dissenters. The 7 justices who decided in the Mazars case, just like the Vance case, Breyer, Sotomayor, Kagan, RBG, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Roberts. Those were the 7. The same 7 that decided the Vance case as well. And the same 2 dissenters, Alito and Thomas. Those are the 2 arch conservatives on that court. So again, what happened here was, in this Mazars decision, was the Supreme Court saying, yes, Congress has access to has the right to go after these financial records. And again, these financial records are not records that are really within the purview of an executive privilege, because again, these are records that preceded Donald Trump's time in office. But Congress cannot get these records right now. Congress cannot seek these records right now. They can do it perhaps after the election, or maybe even a year from now. They can do it when he's out of office, which I'm expecting and hoping and really do believe will be January of next year. That's what I think is happening here. And I think that's what the Supreme Court wanted to avoid making the decision on. Isn't that interesting, though? They remanded the Mazars case back to the lower court that heard it prior to the Supreme Court. And I'm sure at some point they'll make a determination. But isn't it interesting that the Supreme Court, in these 2 Trump cases, Trump versus Vance and Trump versus Mazars, isn't it interesting that they here went out of their way to avoid politics? But 20 years ago, in Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court went above and beyond its own reach and actually waded directly into politics. There were only, to the best of my memory, 2 justices who were on that court in 2000 who are still on this court right now. Can you name who they are? I'll be back with the answer in just a moment. Welcome back. So were you able to name those 2 Supreme Court justices who were involved in the Bush v. Gore decision in December of 2000, December the 13th to be precise? The 2 Supreme Court justices who are on the court right now, the only 2 who remain from that Bush v. Gore decision, an infamous decision, by the way, are Justice Breyer and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They are the only two. And both of them were on the dissent of that Bush v. Gore decision, which essentially said that irreparable harm would be done to George W. Bush if the recount in Florida was allowed to continue. And they ordered the court in Florida. They ordered Florida. The court did, I should say. The Supreme Court, let me be clear. The Supreme Court ordered the state of Florida to stop recounting all the votes for that 2000 presidential election, which is ridiculous. That is a trampling of so-called states' rights. And you know what states' rights really means. But that's what, and you should go and read that decision, by the way. December 13th, 2000, one of the most infamous decisions and one of the most unjust Supreme Court decisions. And there have been lots of them, as I've talked about on this podcast in the numerous episodes. But Bush v. Gore certainly joins that list. Imagine telling Florida or anybody, imagine telling a state to stop counting votes. If that's not antithetical to any notion of quote unquote democracy, nothing is. Al Gore wanted a recount. They were recounting in Florida. And then the Supreme Court, due to a challenge by George W. Bush's lawyers, said, no, you can't count. And, the court, which was, friends of George H.W. Bush, Poppy Bush, W's dad, Rehnquist was on that court. He was the Chief Justice, a good friend of George H.W. Bush. So you know what happened? They fixed it. It was 5-4. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote a stinging dissent, as did Justice Breyer as well. Justice Ginsburg and Justice Breyer made it very clear that this was an absolute trampling of democracy. You got to read that decision. I tell you, that is one heck of a decision. Anyway, that's something I think could happen again. We could see another Bush v. Gore this year with this presidential election. But I don't think it's going to be decided the same way. And that's what I really want to get to next. The you part of this episode, which is called the Supreme Court, Donald Trump, and you the voter, at least. This is where you, the voter, now have a real important job to do. Because even if there is a Bush v. Gore type of challenge, because make no mistake, Donald Trump is going to do that regardless of the outcome, even if he is beaten by a considerable margin at the polls this November. What you have to do is make it happen this November. Not his challenge, because he'll probably do that regardless, as I just said. But you have to make this effort to vote. Not just an effort, you have to do it. You have to vote. And the Supreme Court is precisely why you have to vote. I think admittedly over the last few weeks, in some respects at least, the U.S. Supreme Court has made some good decisions. Now, there have been some very bad ones, like the one that was made, I think, just yesterday, dealing with contraceptives. The Hobby Lobby case, or with religious objections and all that. That was a horrible decision. And Citizens United back in 2010, horrible decision. But over the last, generally speaking, the decision last week or the week before that said that the LGBTQIA community cannot be discriminated against by an employer on the basis of their status as a person who is LGBTQIA. That's a big decision, landmark decision. And you had Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, cross over and become part of that decision. And of course, the DACA case, ruling that Trump could not take away DACA and the protections for DACA individuals. In the immigration case, that was a huge case, a massive decision. That happened last week or the week before as well. And those decisions are key decisions. And that's with really a conservative leaning court. There's no question this court is conservative. Imagine if there was another conservative on this court. Imagine if, God forbid, RBG, something happened to her and she couldn't continue. I mean, I shouldn't even put that out there, because she's had a lot of health issues and she has bounced back. She's a fighter and we need her, but we shouldn't have to be relying on an 80-something-year-old who is, by the way, fit as a fiddle, even with the health issues she's had. But we should not have to be relying on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg, to hold up for us, to hold out for us. That is not what we should be doing. It's not fair to her, and quite frankly, it's not fair to us. We have to be better than that. It's the same thing as when people say, black women are going to save us this November. Every November we get this, black women are going to save. No, listen, black women don't have to save anything. What you have to do is get up off your rusty ass and vote. All of us do. You don't leave this to one group of people. Black women are the most reliable voting bloc of any group in this country. Always have been, quite frankly, when they've had the right to vote, when they've had the access to it and it's not been blocked, or they've not been murdered, or they've not been poll taxed. Black women specifically are the most reliable voting bloc for the Democratic Party, for sure. Over 96%. I guess the official number is 94, but I think it's higher than that. Voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, compared to 87% of black men. So 13% of black men voted for Donald Trump? Yeah, it's true. It's true. That number has to come way lower, way down. And all this Kanye West nonsense that I talked about earlier this week in another episode, the one I did on Kanye West, be not deceived by it. It's all an act. It's all an act to help Trump, his buddy, who, by the way, furnished him between $2 and $5 million with this PPP thing that went to all of these super rich people and their super mega rich businesses. Kanye West got between $2 and $5 million from that. So, of course, this is a payback. This is Kanye West paying him back, right? Oh, I've distanced myself from Donald Trump. You didn't hear, look, this is nonsense. I'm going off on a tangent here for a second. This nonsense about Kanye West distancing himself from Trump, because what I'm saying now happened after the episode I did on Kanye West earlier this week. This nonsense, the notion that Kanye West has distanced himself from Donald Trump, is absolute bunk. For if it were true, you would have seen a million tweets by Donald Trump by now on this whole thing, attacking Kanye West. There has not been a single tweet out of Donald Trump about it. Why? Because he knows that this is bogus. Wouldn't you have seen those tweets? Come on, whenever somebody comes out against Donald Trump, he is always tweeting about them. Here I go talking about his tweets again. Twice in one episode? 3 times? Oh my God. But whenever someone says something about Donald Trump, certainly someone in the public eye, someone in the private eye, he will tweet something nasty in response. There was no such tweet about that with Kanye West. It's been a whole day or two since Kanye West came out in some, I think it was Forbes magazine or something, and had this interview, said I'm disowning Donald Trump now. I'm dumping him. No, you're not. He just dumped you $2 to $5 million, something around $5 million, and you're dumping him. It's some nonsense. This is all a ploy to push black men in particular to vote for Trump. And that's a concern I have, by the way. As a black man, I have this concern about some other black men voting for this racist in the White House. And Kanye West gives them license to do it because they know Kanye West isn't going to win. So Kanye West, in my view, is more of a facilitator than he is somebody who is, I'm a candidate for the independent party. By the way, Kanye West, as I did say in the previous episode I did on Kanye West hasn't filed a single lick of paper, not even a single sheet of it, for his candidacy. He's named this vice presidential candidate, but it's all pomp and circumstance and show. He's not filed any papers with the Federal Election Commission. He's not filed any papers. So the deadlines have gone for most of these positions. He's not running as a Republican. See, that's the thing. If Kanye West was really going to do any damage and really claim to really disown Trump, he'd run as a Republican. But I get it. Those deadlines have long gone too, I'm sure. Obviously. And their nominee is very clear. It's going to be, obviously, Donald Trump. Even though most of these Republican senators now, they're not even going to attend the convention. And by the way, that ad that the Lincoln Project did lately, the recent one, it's a pretty strong ad. A scathing ad, a really good one. By the way, why can't Democrats do ads like that? Why can't they run ads like the way the ads the Lincoln Project run? Why can't the Democrats run ads like that? I guess Joe Biden will take all the help he can get, although he really doesn't need a whole lot of help right now. Donald Trump is running Joe Biden's campaign for him. Come on now, let's be honest. Can we just really be honest about that? Donald Trump is running Joe Biden's campaign. All the self-destruction that Donald Trump is doing and all the destruction he's doing to this country and destruction he's doing to millions of people in it. All of these deaths from COVID-19, over 133,000. And I'm telling you, it's twice as many as that. And I'm telling you, there's more than 3 million cases. It's more like 30 million cases. You got mayors of cities like Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, testing positive. You've got San Francisco Mayor London Breed, at least at this hour, as of this recording, waiting for her test results. I mean, this is disastrous. Disaster what we've got here now. And this pandemic is going to continue to kill millions of people in this country. And, well, the rest of the world, most of whom really have moved through this virus and have been able, despite heavy losses of life, to begin to return to a quote-unquote semblance of normalcy, end quote, are faring just a bit better, although there's still countries like Brazil, there's still countries out there that are suffering and getting some real serious problems. But here in the U.S., you've got here in California, the rates are through the roof. In Texas, in Florida, Oklahoma, and I mean, it's just insane. Insane. It's totally insane. And this is, again, another reason. I mean, that's the campaign. I mean, Joe Biden doesn't really have much to do. I mean, he is making appearances. He is doing ads that have been decent. But look who he's got helping him. The Lincoln Project, I'm sure, has made some kind of deal with him. You don't see Donald Trump, you don't see Joe Biden coming out disclaiming the Lincoln Project. He's not attacking the Lincoln Project. And quite frankly, why should he? I mean, they're doing his job for him. I remember early on, Joe Biden's ads online, his digital ads on Twitter were excellent. Not quite as strong now, once he's doing them on TV. But they're still good ads. I'm not saying Joe Biden's ads aren't good. I'm just saying, why can't Democrats overall do ads with the ferocity and the aggression and the pointedness that the Lincoln Project or these Republicans do? You've got to vote this November. That's my point. And if you want a Supreme Court that you are not sitting on the edge of your seat for each June and July, while you wait for them to come down and make these big decisions that affect your life, your kids' lives, and future generations' lives, you make sure that you vote this November 3rd. And make sure that everybody you know votes this November 3rd. And make sure you vote for the Democrat in every single ballot race in your state. Every single one, down to dog catcher. I don't care if it's dog catcher on the edge of a cliff. If there is a D next to that person's name, if that person's name has the word Democrat attached to it, you vote for that person.
Someday soon, the time of Trump will pass. This circus of incompetence, corruption, and cruelty will end. When it does, the men and women in Trump's Republican Party will come to you, telling you they can repair the damage he's done. They'll beg you to forget their votes to exonerate Trump from his crimes, ask you to forgive their silence, their cowardice, and their betrayals as Trump wrecked this nation. Every time they had a choice between America and Trump, they chose Trump. Every time they were called to the service of this nation and their sacred oath, they chose Trump. Every time, learn their names, remember their actions, and never, ever trust them again.
Now, why can't Democrats do ads like that? That ad was from the Lincoln Project. And that ad is gold. Remember their names. That ad is on YouTube, and you can find it. Just search in YouTube for the Lincoln Project, or make a general search for the Lincoln Project, and you will be able to find that ad in short order. It is entitled Names. The names, since you are listening to this, mentioned in the ad that you will be able to see once you actually watch the ad: Mitch McConnell, Susan Collins, Joni Ernst, Martha McSally, Tom Tillis, Lindsey Graham. All of them are running for re-election. All of these Republicans are running for re-election in the Senate. All of them. This November. All of them voted to acquit Donald Trump for abuses of power and obstruction of justice during that impeachment sham trial that was run by Mitch McConnell earlier this year. And that vote was done on February the 5th of 2020. Do not forget that date either, because it is a date in which these enablers became accomplices of Donald Trump. There are other names mentioned in that ad that you will see, but none of them are running, although we should not forget them either, because they will be running soon enough for another term. And those names are Ted Cruz. Those names are Marco Rubio. Tom Cotton, I believe, is running not this year, but next or the year after. I'll have to check. Maybe he's running this year. Mike Rounds. I mean, there's so many of these. There's 52 out of 53 of them. 52 out of 53. The only Republican senator who did not vote to acquit Trump, specifically on abuse of power, was Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is the only one. Now, he did vote to acquit him of obstruction of justice. That should be mentioned here. But he did not. But he voted to convict him, let me say, on abuse of power. This is all regarding Ukraine. I'm sure many people have already forgotten Ukraine. I mean, people have already forgotten about Donald Trump sitting on his hands doing nothing while Vladimir Putin, an enemy leader, an enemy country, Russia, was paying bounties to the Taliban and to Afghan rebels to kill U.S. military personnel. People have already forgotten about it. The media's not talking about it anymore. The corporate news media, the cable news media here in the United States has absolutely stopped talking about that now. The media is so powerful. You've already forgotten that the protests are still going on. You think the protests are over. At least some of you probably do. These protests are still going on in the streets, all over this country and around the world. You're just not seeing it on your television set. And the thing is that's so powerful about television is out of sight, out of mind. So most of us think that these protests have stopped. They have not. They really have not. Your quest, if you choose to accept it, your mission, is not an impossible mission this November by any stretch. It is not an impossible mission. Your mission, and you should choose to accept it, is to vote out Donald Trump and the Republican Party who are his accomplices, and vote them out from top to bottom, from White House to dog catcher, from federal to local. Make no mistake, this is not going to be easy. There's going to be vigorous challenges at your polling place. I think you're going to see that, and especially in Black, Latinx neighborhoods, especially in elderly areas, you're going to see these nasty Republicans in some of these Black communities and poor communities challenging your right to vote. Challenging, you're not a legitimate voter. And I keep asking on Twitter at the Popcorn REEL and elsewhere, what's your plan for if that happens? I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but I do know that 50,000 Republican trainees are being trained right now to disrupt and to challenge voters at the polling place, should they choose to vote in person. And people are going to choose to vote in person, pandemic or no. What are you going to do if you cannot vote but only on the 3rd of November and not before? You certainly can't vote after November 3rd. So if you're getting any messages, I keep saying this, and I'm going to keep reminding people, if you are getting any messages, robocalls by phone, weird looking messages in the mail that are saying to you, vote on November 4th because that's when the election is, make sure you report that to 866-OUR-VOTE. Make sure you also report it to your county board of elections or your city board of elections. And you can look up that information and find out where that board of elections is located. Make sure you also put it on social media too, so that people can really see this, and tag some news organizations in the process. Because the election is on November the 3rd. Not the 4th, not the 5th, not the 10th. November 3rd, not Thanksgiving, November 3rd, 2020. And there is early voting in many states. Not all states, but many states have early voting. There's also vote by mail. And you now have reports that were on CNN yesterday, Abby Phillip reporting on this, that you've got Trump saying, oh no, vote by mail is horrible, it's rigged, it's this, it's terrible. Yet he's voting by mail. You've got his son, Donald Trump Jr., sending out robocalls saying, oh, vote by mail, telling his supporters, vote by mail. You've got Lara Trump, same thing, vote by mail, vote by mail. So they're making private robocalls to their supporters, to Trump supporters, urging them to vote by mail. And then you got Donald Trump out there saying, oh, vote by mail is horrible, it's rigged. See how evil and hypocritical these people are? How sick they are? Huh? Do you see that? He votes by mail. The White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, votes by mail. Bill Barr, who was on TV recently talking about, oh, they can reach their hands in the mail and take out the vote and interfere with it and manipulate the envelope. He votes by mail. There are at least 15 other people in his cabinet that vote by mail. So if all of them vote by mail, if it's good enough for them, why isn't it good enough for you? Early voting or vote by mail. My recommendation, quite frankly, is to early vote. If your state has early voting, please vote early. It avoids all of these problems, potential problems. You not getting a vote by mail ballot before the 3rd. You being stuck in the line for 8, 9, 10 hours. Broken machines. All those things are certain to happen this November. I've talked about this before on this podcast in numerous episodes. I've talked about this. You've seen it already this year in the primaries. This is a rehearsal. Trust me, the Republicans have given you a roadmap for exactly what they are going to do this November in less than 4 months. You saw it in Kentucky. You saw it in Texas. You saw it in Wisconsin. You saw it in Georgia, particularly in Atlanta. They're putting it in your face. They're putting it in your face. Now is the time, people. This is the time to have a plan for November. Have a plan now for what you're going to do if you face these issues. Make sure you educate yourself as a voter, not just about who you're going to vote for, obviously, but what the ballot looks like. Is it going to be a confusing ballot? Will you be able to see the ballot or see the type of ballot? Do you know what that's going to be? You can't just go into a voting booth on November 3rd and not know anything and just go in there and start making your choices. I mean, I know a lot of people do that. But now that still lots of people are indoors and still this pandemic continues on, it's getting worse here in the US. This is an opportunity to, if you have a laptop and online access, to educate yourself as a voter. Find out what your state's voting laws are, what the requirements are, what kind of ID you need. Can you get that ID? How do you procure such an ID? You need that information now. You need to know what that information is, and you need to act upon it now. It is still July, but it is getting to the point in which you should now have a plan about what you're going to do in November. If you're not early voting, or even if you are early voting, please do so. I strongly recommend you come prepared. You wouldn't come to a driver's license test not prepared, would you? You wouldn't come to a... Think about it. Think about the biggest test you've taken in your life. You wouldn't come to a bar exam to become an attorney unprepared, would you? Or a medical entrance exam, medical boards exam. You wouldn't come to your medical boards to become a doctor and not be prepared for any of that, would you? So why would you, when deciding some of the most pivotal questions and pivotal things that will affect your life and your children's lives and your and numerous generations' lives beyond, why would you come to that unprepared? Say why. Why would you do that? My point is that voting is paramount. And if it wasn't paramount, if your vote wasn't paramount, believe me, the Republican Party would not be spending all this energy to steal your vote, to suppress your vote, to lie to you about where the polling place is, to lie to you about, oh, the election's on November 4th. To lie to you and say to you, well, if you have outstanding taxes, you can't vote this November. They wouldn't be trying these tricks. They wouldn't be making it more difficult. They wouldn't be confusing you. They wouldn't be giving you malfunctioning voting machines. They wouldn't be making you stand on lines for 10 hours waiting to vote. If your vote was not important and not paramount, they know they can't win these elections unless they steal them, and they're doing it right in front of you. Now is the time for us, for you as a voter, to strike back at the ballot box. Educate yourself now. This is the spring training for November. Think of it that way. Forgive me for using a baseball metaphor. But spring training begins now for November. And the plan should be developed right now. This is the time. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.